NHL team, especially when Montreal is so close by. I definitely think having a franchise in Port-Rivière is nice for Quebec City, and it definitely gives them a sports franchise that's maybe nearby to cheer for. I know it's not the Quebec Nordiques, but at least something. But I definitely think that the Nordiques themselves, as being an NHL team in the modern day, I just don't think it's really something that's going to happen. It falls into the same category as people wanting the Montreal Expos to come back in the MLB. It's just a market that just isn't going to work, even with all the weird ways the MLB's proposed it, like splitting the season with the Tampa Bay Rays and stuff like that. So while I do think it'd be interesting to see the Nordiques come back, and I'd love to see it, and I'd probably buy a Nordiques jersey. I'd buy a Nordiques jersey with Jacob Chikrin on the back of it for all I care. But I think Gary Bettman is definitely very stubborn when it comes to trying to keep Arizona in Arizona, even if there's pretty much nothing really, I know, really out front direct opinion, I know, but there's not really a whole lot to cheer for the Coyotes at the moment, especially since they've dealt away most of their big star players, and they definitely seem to be in a kind of limbo right now. But even then, I don't think Bettman's going to budge on the Coyotes until he absolutely has to. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out.
It really will be interesting. And Sebastian, since you are one half of the prospects here, I think you could appreciate, though, despite the, should I say animosity we have against Arizona? I'm not sure. As fans from Canada, they did produce Austin Matthews after all. I mean, there's obviously some products that are coming out of Arizona, but like, do you actually think that there's still a future in Arizona, or is this just a lame duck at this point?
I mean, we've just spent like 10 minutes dunking on Arizona. But like the thing is,
continue if you want.
They do have some really like diehard fans, right? Like at least on like hockey Twitter, there are quite a few people in there that are Coyotes fans, and
all 12 of them. Yeah, I agree.
But like, I mean, I feel like they've just been so hampered by just like terrible owners constantly that like the fan base has also just been kind of like left out to dry in this situation. And like, yeah, I mean, Austin Matthews, you can say a lot about him. I don't love the guy, but phenomenal player who comes from Arizona, right? Like they do have some products coming out now, and yeah, I mean, it's always a difficult thing when you move a franchise away, right? Like it's a bit easier with Atlanta because they had two attempts that both failed miserably, especially once Kovalchuk left, but like with a team like Arizona. It also hurts to like tear a team away from a fan base, right? Like we saw that with the same thing with the Nordiques, right? Just like the heartbreak. And like, even though it's Arizona, it's the southern US where hockey probably shouldn't be, like you do have diehard fans down there, and it does still hurt to tear that away. So at least if you move them to like Houston or something, it's still close enough by where like you can still like have a connection. But it's like it's the same thing. Like you don't see too many Colorado Avalanche fans in Quebec anymore because just is so far away. Whereas if they'd moved to like, I don't know, Hamilton or Halifax or somewhere that's still like,
yeah, that partisanship would stay a little more alive. Yeah,
could like kind of keep it right. And like the first time really that like the Avalanche like showed like their connection to the Nordiques was this season with the reverse retro jerseys. Before that, it was really like a tough break of not really showing that history. And yeah, like with the Coyotes,
let's be honest. The reverse retro jersey, though, was a huge marketing ploy that actually ended up being very successful. They were piggybacking off the Carolina Hurricanes, who were using the Hartford Whalers, essentially. And they used the retro jerseys once. People went crazy. Yeah. And, and then everyone was like, oh, we could do the same. And then you saw, like the Nordique, which was a great jersey. I mean, make no mistake about it. But I mean, come on. It
wasn't really an attachment to Quebec. It was more just an attachment to
money.
Yeah, exactly.
Scott made a great point earlier when he was talking about the Expos. I'll do the quick comparison and then we'll move on to something else. Like he was talking about the Expo. The Expo is exactly the same thing, guys. I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan. I love, like, I still cling on to that hope that I will one day be able, to go see the Expos and everything. But that was the situation. That's exactly what those dozens and dozens of fans of the Coyotes are living year after year. It's a small market that's been, although, they have the support of the league.
They're living in a continual Blue Monday.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that hurts, man.
Sorry for that,
Patrick. but it's like, imagine, you're following a team and you're so dedicated to it, and year after year, you're like, oh wow, we got some good players, and then it just get gutted. and he gets traded. It ends up being a farm team for everyone else and everything. But then we were mentioning the Atlanta Thrashers, and I'm sorry, but don't make fun of the Thrashers at their number one pick, Patrick Stefan. Josh, I'm going to ask you a question, and then we'll ask everyone what they think. Who is your favorite, I would say, dead franchise or former franchise that, if you had a time machine, you could go back, you would revive them, and they would still be us? Josh, your pick. Go first.
I've got 2 words for you. You could have your
Hey, this is a kid-friendly show, so anybody who was alive during the Wrestling Attitude Era, we knows what those 2 words are, so please be careful, man.
Oh, yes. You could keep your Monday Night Football themes, your little World Juniors jingles, the Hockey Night in Canada new and old songs. To me, my favorite sports song is the Brass Bonanza. I want to see the Hartford Whalers back so badly. I love the song. Their jerseys are great. I think their logo is one of the best things I've seen sports logo-wise. Unfortunately, they were in Hartford, and where even is Hartford? I think they played in a mall. Connecticut. I think they played in a mall, like my little OHL team, local OHL team plays in a mall. But they were fantastic, and I love that song. So I just want to hear that 3 or 4 times a night.
Yeah, the issue with the Whalers, obviously, there was the ownership issue and whatnot, but there was the whole ordeal, the fact that they were right beside Boston. Like Massachusetts is just right beside, so Boston had a little issues with them being there and everything. But they almost survived. Like a little known fact about the Whalers is that they left because they couldn't get a deal for a new arena. Which was the bottom line. The issue was the government ended up rejecting a proposal from the Whalers franchise to build a new arena out of private money. So it would have been almost 100% privately funded, and then the state was only going to give a minimal amount of money, with something like $10-20 million or something like that. Not long after, the New England Patriots came along, and they got financed almost entirely publicly for this state-of-the-art, almost billion-dollar, stadium. So we know where the the priorities lied up in what did you say it was, Hartford? So, Maria, your favorite past franchise that you would bring back in a heartbeat?
I guess I would have to say the Thrashers, but only because they drafted Ben Sherratt. That's like my biased answer.
It's not a bad answer.
It's not a bad answer at all, as a matter of fact. It's like we're all Ben Sherratt fans, but the Thrashers, I have to admit, the Thrashers had cool colors though. Like the jerseys were pretty totally dope and everything. It's a shame that hockey never caught on in Atlanta, because they have such a huge population and so many dedicated sports fans, but it just never seems to stick, right?
To quote Patrick Stefan, they missed the open net.
Man,
poor guy.
Guys, this segment has so many low blows. It's ridiculous. But okay, Sebastian, your turn, buddy.
Okay, I have 2 very obscure ones, like as an old. The first one,
of course, because you're a history professor in making, right? So
going into bachelor's degree, that's a long road. But the first one would be the Pittsburgh Pirates, which is not only an MLB team, but also was a hockey team.
My goodness,
no affiliation, no affiliation to the MLB team. Was just coincidentally from 1925 to 1930, and the heartbreaker here is that the Pittsburgh team relocated to Philadelphia and became the Quakers. And they had to cease operations because of the Great Depression. So,
Most people don't even know the Quakers were a
happy
thing,
story.
So.
The other one would be the Montreal Wanderers.
Another great story, Sebastian. Please tell us all about it.
They only played 6 games and they won 1. So.
Don't disrespect the Wanderers. They won like 4 Stanley Cups in a row in the golden era of the NHL.
But in the NHL. 1 win, 5 losses,
and then their
1
arena burnt
season.
down.
And that's exactly I know.
And the reason for relocation and disbandment was because A, the arena burned down, and B, they lacked players because of World War I. Like,
golden era NHL.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine an NHL team like, say, I don't know, the Vancouver Canucks have to cease operations because the Rogers Place burns down, and like their entire defensive core, which barely exists in the first place, has to go fight in a war. Like, like, oh, cool, that's fun stuff. What an uplifting story. So yeah,
I'd
in
love
sad
to.
stories like these, I find the humor. This is my
I'd
thing.
love to add on to what Sebastian was talking about, if I'm able, because I think I'm with you on the idea that I think there are some really great teams from the 1920s and 30s in the NHL that people don't talk about. For me, my two picks would be the Hamilton Tigers and the New York Americans, both of which had one of the greatest players in the NHL, and Wilfred Shorty Green, who was a big all-star for the team. The Tigers disbanded because they went on strike, and then their ownership ended up just cutting the whole team because of that. And the Americans were due to the Rangers. But for my third answer, I'm going to say one thing: if the Seattle Kraken do not make their third jersey, the Seattle Metropolitans, jersey, that's something I'd really like to see. The Seattle Metropolitans were the first American team to win the Stanley Cup, and they had one heck of a jersey, to say the least.
It was pretty dope, and I think, as a matter of fact, Metropolitans was one of the finalists for the names, wasn't it?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. My pick. Okay, you know what? You guys want to make a dumb pick and a serious pick? I'll do that as well. So my obscure pick, we're going to stay in our backyard. I'm going to say the Montreal Maroons. I mean, for the only reason that, first of all, also cup winners, also, giving the Habs a run for their money in terms of attendance and fanatics and whatnot, and they're named after a color. The maroon is essentially a shade of brown. I mean, that's like, how original was that? Their jerseys were amazing, and I always look around sometimes. Like, sometimes I'm looking for, like old, replica jerseys or t-shirts and everything. You don't find many, and then when you do, you're like, man, they're gorgeous. So cool. They're gorgeous, man. Back in the days, they knew how to make a proper sweater. But my actual
the OG Red Blacks, named after colors.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but you have to say Red Blacks in big capital letters and yell it out loud if you're a CFL fan. I'm sorry, Sebastian.
I hate it.
But my actual pick is going to be the Quebec Nordiques. I mean, it's my generation as well. Giving away my age a little bit here. I mean, I was old enough to see the rivalries between the Habs and the Canadians. When the first round of the '93 playoffs happened, everyone was on the edge of their seat because Quebec had a better team, on paper at least, right? And then they started winning 1 game, 2 games, and then once we came back, and it was going back and forth. And the next thing you know, you're like, man, we could lose this one. But then, we happen to have a goalie named Patrick Roy, which helps a little bit, especially come playoff time. But all the stories for anybody who's listening, who's 20 years and under or whatever, who hasn't had a chance to see the Nordiques play, I would say that 9 out of 10 stories are true. Yeah, it was that intense because there was a time before the globalization of hockey where people played for the sweater they were wearing. Players, when you were looking at the rosters at the time, you were looking at Alain Côté or Stéphane Fizet eventually, and it versus Vincent D'Anfous, Patrick Roy, so it's like guys from Montreal versus guys from Quebec, and there was actually an actual rivalry, and it went all the way into the stands. You hear about the Yankees against the Red Sox, for example, in baseball, and how they absolutely loathe each other. But that's how it was. It was Montrealers against Quebecers, and even if you go today, people of a certain age, they still look down on Montrealers. They're like, oh yeah, you're from Montreal, you're an Anglo or whatever, and then they would hear your Montreal accent and your Montreal ways. You're like, yeah, man, wow, okay, today, you don't really see, but at the time, that's how it was, man. Like it was city versus city. It was you against your dad wearing different colors. It was your drunken uncle coming in with his ridiculous Winnipeg Jets jersey that had absolutely nothing to do with the rivalry at the same time, but it was households would light up. On a Saturday night, Montreal against Quebec, forget it. There's no one in the streets because everyone's watching the game, no matter how crummy both seasons were having, because you knew something was going to happen, and we heard, of course, of the Good Friday Massacre, for example, being, probably the most intensely playoff game ever played, because I think it was 900,000 penalty minutes or something. And I'm almost not exaggerating, right? So.
There was definitely an aura to the Nordiques Canadiens rivalry that hasn't been seen in Montreal sports in quite a long time.
No, exactly. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna happen anymore.
I think Quebec fans are still feeling Scott Young scoring that goal in 1993.
Or Alain Côté. Mm-hmm. Il était-tu bon le but? Il était-tu bon le but? On sait pas s'il était bon le but. No, the goal was good, but we're never going to admit that, right? So.